Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Depends the part of the world you are following us. I am Mazi Chika Austin, and just get this set. Okay, we are good to go. Okay. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Um, Depends the part of the world you are following us from. I am Mazi Chika Austin, and we are here once again to discuss issues of importance. I mean, the contemporary issue, an ongoing issue. We want to look at China, we want to look at China and the world, we want to look at China and Africa, we want to have a discussion on that as much as we can. And equally, by special grace of Okike, we equally see if we can come up with a very good inference on the ongoing discussion as regards to China and the world as regards to China and Africa, of course. So before now, a lot of debates have been going on. Yes, people have been talking over what some persons said is a Chinese attempt to take over Africa. A lot of discussions have been going on online, on social media, and other platforms. People have been saying China wants to take over Africa. People have been saying Africa is in a very dear threat as a result of Chinese expansionist West. Yes, that is, all those views are being propelled. They are not just accusation. They are not just a passive reactions. People never just came up and start reacting on that. Something somehow, somewhere led to those reactions. But before we go to the in-depth part of today's discussion, let me confirm if we are being received loud and clear from your own point. If you're hearing us loud and clear, then we proceed. Very, very important we get that. If you're receiving us, then we have no other option than to just move on to discuss the issue at hand. Very, very important. So help us to confirm if you're getting us loud and clear. Then we'll move on until yes. If my voice is coming out loud, it's coming out clear. Oh, thank you, Mazu Chenna. Okay, we'll move ahead. Let's look at Africa. Everybody just raising up panics, Everyone is just trying to feel worried what might likely be the future of Africa in the hand of China, or in the hand of an expansionist China. There have been different postulations from the African side, from the Western front, and the other angles. People have been asking what actually will be the future of Africa that energy-hungry China uh, is in need of. But let me start by saying this. What Chinese are doing in Africa is not new. The Western countries have equally done it earlier before now. Before what China is doing, before the Chinese scramble in Africa, we've experienced historically full of facts, we've equally wrecked the activities of the Western nations. You know, how they balkanize Africa, how they bastardize Africa, how they tried in different fronts to ruin Africa. China is of, 21st century action. But in 20th century, in 19th century, in 18th century, we equally saw how Africa was raped, how Africa was ruined, how Africa was devastated by the Western Front. The Europeans precisely had a rich history of destroying Africa. We saw what the amputation of Africans in Congo done by one of the European kings, King Lupompo or something like that. We equally saw the Italian attempt of invading Ethiopia in early part of 20th century. And we knew number of Africans that were killed. What of the issue of the case of Biafra, which involved the repatriation of able-bodied Biafran citizens to where we call today America, courtesy of the European slave masters. So everybody is just trying to tell us what China, I'm talking about precisely the Western Front. They are trying to show us what China is going to do, how China is going to pillage Africa. But mind you, before they show you that, remember they were also, and not just were, they are still destroying Africa. Talking about the Western Front. A lot of the backwardness Africa nations are recording as of present is of courtesy of the rascality and the sponsorship of dictatorship and corruption by the most Western countries. So you can now understand this whole thing looks like a game. Somebody is playing chess with the minds of Africans simply because the African people refuse to have what we call mental reawakening. Our inability to think aright led to this chess playing on African soil. Because we are suffering what we are suffering today in Africa simply to the fact that we refuse to be rational thinkers. We refuse to be logical thinkers. And we are ruined by the worst leadership imposed on us. If not Chinese, it will definitely be the Western Front. And that's why Africa is just like a woman who is being raped from all sides of her body. And it's really shocking. So forget all the shouts they are talking about China. Yes, China is coming to do her own damage if she is not already on it in Africa. But mind you, prior to Chinese scramble, we've had the Berlin West Africa Conference, which led to the major problem of Africa because there was a kind of destruction of organic growth of nation state system in Africa. The Berlin West Africa Conference was the height of distortion of social development in Africa because it was at that point that people were moved together, fused together, even when they have a different ideological differences. And today, same Africa is suffering the same act of, 19th century, 1814 and 1815, thereabout. So what are we trying to say? What we are trying to say is this: for objective discussion, for sincere analysis, the Chinese are not the first people to rape Africa. The Europeans did the same. The Asians, especially the Arabs, equally had their own history of pillaging African soil. So you can now understand that Africa have passed through. I don't buy this idea of being sympathetic to Africa. I don't subscribe to that. I don't subscribe to, using the tool of sympathy. No, that is stupidity. Africa is ruined today because people believe, some persons believe, that they need to be sympathized to, that they need to be assisted. And that is where we are. So let's look at China, because that is the whole let's look at China as a topic of discussion. Chinese policy in Africa, what China tends to achieve in Africa. Yes, China seems to be a loose mad dog, trying to take hold. Yes, some persons have postulated that there is an attempt by China to ship down some percentage of her population down to Africa. In so doing, changing the racial composition of Africa in future. That is postulation, mind you. And some persons who agreed on this view, this line of view, gave some convincing evidences, like looking at population explosion in China, and Chinese billionaires buying some lands, especially in Sudan, South Sudan, and some parts of Africa, just the way the Europeans did. Mind you, the racial composition in southern part of Africa, like in Zimbabwe, in Botswana, in Swahili, in South Africa, and all the rest of them, we are not natural, mind you. What China is trying to do today, or what some persons say China wants to do, which is the shipment of some population of Chinese down to Africa to distort the natural racial composition in future, was equally done by the Europeans. And that's why if you go to Zimbabwe, if you go to South Africa, if you go to Swaziland, and all the rest of them, you see, you don't just call these places black society. You see whites, you see Indians, you see all the rest of them, lumped into a reconfigured environment. And that is it. So if someone says China wants to achieve something, I think China is trying to review how the Europeans raped Africa, and see if they can do the same part Because, the problem I have with current generation of Africa is that we are mentally deluded, deeply mentally deluded, that we don't understand the importance of history. If you are close to history, you will understand that what China wants to do in Africa is not new. Same were done to Africans years back. But because we are, we claim we are educated, because our own definition of education, the yardstick is when you can couple good English, or some people will say Queen's English, and somebody says he is educated. But I'm talking about when it comes to being rational thinkers, when it comes to logical approach, critical evaluation to events, we are definitely lagging behind on it. And that's why you see everybody, the African youth, just making noise on social media without understanding that this is a policy-based issue. What China is going to do in Africa is a policy-based issue. It's not something you just repair on social media. Rather, it involves grassroots watching. It involves critical evaluation of every single policy of China in Africa. And let me shock you, in case you don't know, it's better you understand this. Chinese will always have their ways in Africa. There is no internal muscle within the I don't know if you understand. I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say. I said, what China wants to achieve in Africa, she will get it. She will definitely get it. Remember, I'm not here to sweet talk anyone. I'm here to say the way it is. Why there will be so difficult resistance within the African hemisphere or African enclave to repel Chinese policy, to repel Chinese agenda, is because within the African continent, there is no leadership. What do I mean by leadership? Take for instance, let me use other continents to give instance. Take for instance, if you want to carry out, if there is a plan for external penetration in South American region, you will see Brazil leading the rest of South American region to repel that external incursion. If you want to still do same in Asia, you will see India, you will see China, you will see India, you will see China. If you want to achieve external incursion in Asia, you will see India is there to oppose you, you will see Japan is there to oppose you, you will see China is there to oppose you. Same applies to the Oceania. Australia is there to lead, New Zealand is equally there. But when it comes to Africa political composition, economic front, is as porous as whatever you can think about. I'm going to explain to you. So you understand why the noise we are making on social media will not achieve absolutely anything other than just mere social media noise making. Now, if you look at Africa political composition, you will discover that as this very moment we speak, the supposedly giant of Africa, or was supposed to be a leading nation in Africa, talking about Nigeria, is just being governed by the most mentally bereft elements. In fact, Nigeria is on her knees. The leadership of Nigeria does not even understand anything other than begging, and begging. A government that begs like something else. A government that is financially irresponsible, financially reckless, cannot repel China's dirty business in Africa. You can now understand what awaits Africa. And when you look at Nigeria, for instance, you will discover that Nigeria leadership in Africa is in a very big question. Take, for instance, Chad is even giving Nigeria ultimatum to come and take over her land that is in possession of Chad. So you understand the whole ball game. That even Nigeria that's supposed to checkmate, that's supposed to have a critical evaluation of Chinese business in Africa, is even currently a stooge to China. Why? Because the present government in Nigeria haven't, gotten so disturbed and worried with Western civil society organizations and bodies that want transparency, that want human rights to be respected. The government in Nigeria does not want anyone to tell him, see, the number of persons you killed, we don't want that. We don't, like, there, for instance, is official that the Nigeria security agents have even killed more people than COVID-19 within this period. So they don't want such situation where their rascality will be checked by Amnesty International, their financial recklessness and looting will be called to order by Transparency International and other civil society organizations, international organizations. So they don't want that. So what this current Nigerian government did was to back Western fronts and embrace China. And guess what? Because she understands that China is not interested with how you govern your people. China does not call countries to accountable. China does not have organizations that talked about whether you're looting the money you're receiving. China is not interested if you're, rolling on the bodies of your people with armored personnel carriers. China is not interested on those cultures and value system of the Western world. So the current APC government in Nigeria decided to embrace China. So a country who is approaching China because she does not want to be accountable and answerable to a Western front. Do you think such country will oppose China? The answer is no. So when you look at the level the Nigerian government is ready to compromise because of their involvement, their dealings with Chinese Communist Party, then you will now understand how penetrating China is going to be in Africa. Now, another country you can as well look at, let's look at South Africa and look at if South Africa is going to do anything as regards to checkmating Chinese expansion in Africa. In fact, the present South Africa government is also as irresponsible as what you have in Nigeria. She's busy on borrowing. The way the sister nation Nigeria is being financially irresponsible, so is the current South African government. In fact, their energy sector is being, I think Chinese government, Chinese companies manning it currently. I read so. South African energy company, electricity company. And the same South Africa have decided to run an amateur foreign policy. What do I mean by amateur foreign policy? Yes, there was an apartheid in South Africa, no doubt about that. And that action is condemnable. But what South African government from, after Thabo Mbeki, so to say, from Zuma's time, the foreign policy of South African government became anti-Western nations because somebody believed that the role of the Western countries during the apartheid period ought not to be forgiven. Somebody believes that everything that has to do with the West should be totally disregarded. I don't say what the Western nations have been doing. Even earlier I said it, that they equally added in raping of. In fact, they were the first to rape Africa. But what I'm trying to say is this. Today, South Africa government is deeply penetrated by Chinese government that they cannot oppose China in Africa. So when you now understand the irresponsibility of Nigeria leadership and South African leadership, you will now understand that Africa is as porous as whatever you think of. Because these are governments who are not ready to be accountable to anybody, especially when it comes to financial transparency. They don't want. And they are happy with the way China deals with them, because China does not care how they spend the money she borrows to them. She doesn't care on human rights. She doesn't care on financial transparency. And these guys are happy for the fact that China is not, releasing watchdogs around them. Like the Western Front, we always, when they give you loan, they push civil society organizations to check how you're utilizing that money. They attach conditions. And they are happy that China does not attach any condition. China does not send civil society organizations after loan. So they are happy dealing with China than the Western world. You can now understand why, no matter what you talk, Nigeria is going deeply involved with China. South Africa is going deeply involved with China, because these are governments who don't want transparency. They don't want accountability. They don't want, in fact, they always say that they are being bored down by the Western civil society organization. So you can now understand why Africa is lying in a very serious state. Because there is no leadership. There is no continental leadership. You can never count one country that can boldly stand up to defend Afrocentrism. There is no single country in Africa that can boldly stand up to say Africa belongs to Africans. Absolutely none. And you can now appreciate, let me tell you something. You know, when people talk about revolution, when people talk about bringing a change, when people talk about uprising in Africa, do you think that can be easy? Ask yourself a question. How many African youths are conscious? Because revolution starts from consciousness. As I speak to you, in the entire Africa, because I have made an extensive research, in entire Africa, the only people you can say by a limit that they are conscious are the Ghanaians, and I will explain why. And the second people are the Biafran people. The rest are just visionless and directionless. Why the Ghanaians? Why do you have conscious Ghanaian youth? You have conscious Ghanaian youth because the influence of Kwame Nkrumah, you know, what happened in Ghana, or what you see in Ghana, especially in Ghana literature, in Ghana academic process, is that those Ghanaian youths who have passed through the university process in Ghana are being exposed to the political philosophies of Kwame Nkrumah, mind you. And remember, Kwame Nkrumah political philosophy centers on Afrocentric. It centers on making Africa to be for Africans. It centers on black pride, the pride of the black race, though it was cut short by the same Western nations. But Ghanaian youths always dream, because Kwame Nkrumah embedded, transferred in the minds of Ghanaian youths the pride of being a Ghanaian. So there is this consciousness of whom they are, a relative consciousness, not necessarily absolute one, because as time evolved, the political philosophy of Kwame Nkrumah began to lose weight, because those who succeeded him, you know, ended up trying to totally destroy that idea and concept. So it was not really as weighty as the way it used to be in 1960s, in 70s. So, but at the level of academic exposure, the Ghanaian youths are being talked about Kwame Nkrumah political philosophy, and it's all about a protectionist and projective political philosophy. It's protectionist because it's protecting the blacks, the African countries, against neocolonialism, against any form of external penetration. It's projecting in the sense that it's trying to bring to the world, initiate the blacks, initiate the Africans to engage in the world as active actors and not passive actors, to engage as donors, as contributors, active contributors in international affairs, and not aid receiving mentality that we all have. You cannot see the difference between what Ghanaians are being bequeathed to or with, what they got transferred to, and what the rest of African nations inherited. Take for instance, Nigeria what did they inherit? They inherit stupidity of every 4 years. You take rice, you go and carry ballot box for one criminal who called himself a politician, who is even worse than Satan. They inherited orphans of useless thought. Being a graduate, then you go and look for a job. No consciousness of whom they are. No mental reawakening. And that's why they are hopeless. That's why you see them, they mean nothing to the rest of the world. Because at the level of mind, they were configured mentally. The university that supposed to expose them to a particular political philosophy never did. The university they went to that's supposed to expose them to a particular thought, historical exposure, never did. Rather, the university they went to exposed them on, you understand me? Rather, the university they went to exposed them on. So what am I trying to say? Sorry, I'm just having some interrupting calls. Sorry, I'm having some interrupting calls, but we must move ahead as much we can. So, but the university they went to, talking about, you see what we talked about, Ghanaian students and the Nigerian students. But in the case of Nigerian students, the university they went to, mastered them, gave them mastery, gave them perfection from how to sort, which is cheating, academic language for cheating, how to dream to be a first-class student without working hard for it. And that is, you know what it means? In a situation where a system teaches you that you can ride a car without working, because in the university they are meant to understand that you might not read. That is how the mind is so powerful. Any society you want to destroy, you don't need to use gun. Destroy them mentally, they will now do the physical destructions for you. And that is exactly the state of Africa. The university, the youth of Nigerians are being exposed, taught them one foolish thought. What is that foolish thought? That you can be a first-class student, a first-class holder anywhere on paper without reading. How possible is that? And it's possible in Nigeria that you might not open your textbook for one day and yet to be a first-class student. So it's a miracle. And that is, so when they graduate with that mindset, they are first class, they've never opened, this is the university exposing them to this kind of thinking. So when you see them, they graduate and they enter into the wider society. Now, they now believe, that is why you see Nigeria will never be good. They now believe that one day they will be like Europe without working for it. That they can build a society that looks like America without working for it. Because, of course, the lecturer have made them to understand that you can have a first class on paper without even reading. But in Ghana, we saw their university exposing them to Kwame Nkrumah theory, political philosophy. You now see the two different things. Why, when they are called in Nigeria lazy youth, called animals, you see them using 200 naira data to react stupidly. But don't you think they are worse than that? So, another group of conscious population we are seeing in Africa is the Biafran youth. And I'm going to explain. I'm not saying it because I'm a Biafran. Anyway, it doesn't make, I don't think I'm helping myself if I sweet talk myself into what we are not. It's going to be highly devastating. It's self-deception, and the worst form of deception is when you deceive yourself. Now, why is the world seeing the Biafran population as another sophisticated population? Now, the truth remains. The world understands the place of information. Information. What you're exposed to matters a lot in your life. What you hear what you see. Build up 70% of your personality, your being. The totality of your being is determined by what you hear, what you see. Because what you hear and what you see move down to your subconscious and build up the personality you are. Now, in the case of the Biafran population, for the past over 5 years, thereabout, they have been exposed to his hidden historical facts. Hidden, take note of this word, hidden historical facts by the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra. You might not understand the mental solidification that Mazen Nnamdi Kanu is doing in the minds of every Biafran youth. The good part of that is this. He is recreating, making that from a Nigerian society, deplorable society, mentally ruined society, creating another group, another set of population that are going to be different from this larger stupid population. And it's an amazing thing. As we speak about Chinese expansion, most African youths don't know what we are talking about. If you go to East Africa, their youths don't even know what is happening. They are not conscious. If you go down to South African region, if you go to Swaziland, if you go to Zimbabwe, if you go to South Africa, if you go to those countries within that region, most of their youths are not conscious of what is happening. If you come to West Africa, you equally discover a very serious state of ignorance as regards to what we are discussing. But within the Biafran defined population, you now see a conscious youth who are mentally alerted on today and events of tomorrow. And that is exactly what Africa needs to survive the future. Make no mistake of this, whether you like it or not. If there is going to be an outbreak of Third World War, it will be fought in African soil. I repeat, if there is going to be an outbreak of Third World War, it will be fought on African soil. Simply because there is since let me have a some chronological arrangement in terms of my dating. Since 9/11, talking about when Osama attacked United States, from 9/11 downward, Africa, there is a second scramble in Africa. Many countries are moving down to Africa with an impatient speed. When I mean many countries, I mean many countries, literally. I'm not using a figurative term here. India is moving, Japan is moving, China is moving, United States is moving, European Union is moving. Name them. Many countries are moving down in Africa in a large scale. But how many Africa, what is the percentage of African population that is aware that there is this conscious move to reconfigure the racial composition of Africa? Very few of African population are aware. Less than 2% of the population is aware of what is ongoing. So, but in the case of China, because we are talking about China, in the case of China, China understands that she must penetrate Africa with two tools. The one tool is the tool of money. And how will she achieve that? She has to achieve that by giving these terribly corrupt African leaders any money they want, without minding their human rights records, without minding the degree of their corruption. And China understands that such policy will make all these dictators, all these corrupt African leaders to just naturally run to her. And it worked. The money she pumped into Africa without minding their human rights records, their financial records, without minding all these indices that Western countries always require or ask before giving you aid, is now making all these evil African leaders to choose China than embracing the Western nations. So you cannot see why in almost all the sub-regions of Africa, you can see a reasonable presence of Chinese investment. Like in Nigeria, the construction is gradually being replaced with China. Formerly, it was the Arabs. In fact, from the West, they handed it over to the Arabs when it was obvious to them that the Arabs were ready. You know, formerly it was the Western nations who were doing a lot of the construction. That was before the democratic dispensation. So when the civilian government came in, they handed over to the Arabs. Why? Because the Arabs were helping them for money laundering. They were helping them for a lot of evil businesses. You know, the Western companies could not do it effectively because when they do it, the home country will, you know, try them for corruption, like the case of Siemens, you know, the German Siemens and all the rest of them. Most of the companies that are involved in Obasanjo, the millions of dollars he wasted, Siemens and all the rest of them, were all tried. So these Western countries could not do that. So what these guys did was to hand over to the Arabs. Arabs don't care, the Lebanese, the Egyptians, they hand over construction. But today, they are dumping the Arabs to embrace Chinese companies. So that's why you see them embracing China, because China doesn't care about transparency, she doesn't care about human rights, she doesn't give a fuck, you know, over those records. And she is heavily penetrating in African soil. But let me tell you something. Whether you accept it or not, why she is doing those things, the Western nations cannot go mad the way China is going in Africa. The Western nation cannot overlook those human rights records because they want to win Africa. But guess what? They will boot out of China in Africa through their military arsenals. You will see it. Because why we say this, we try to tell you where the future is heading to, so that especially to the Biafran population, which is our primary constituency, we try to educate ourselves of where the future is moving on, so that you don't say it, you know, came out of surprise. Africa is going to be a war theater because the West cannot compete with China in terms of money dish out. China gives money, nobody queries what she gives her, because China has one party system, the Communist Party of China, and nobody is just a purely dictatorial system. Nobody questions the premier. Absolutely nobody questions him, and he possesses an absolute power. Nothing like civil society organization, nothing like a group to question what he does in foreign policy of China. You understand me? So, but the West cannot do that because the system they run cannot allow them to engage Chinese in Africa on such economic dish out. But there is only one option, and I tell you, they are going to use to battle China in Africa. Why I always say this, for you to understand that Africa is the future war theater. Get that sink in you. Let that sink in you. Africa is the future war theater between the West and China. Remember, they have tried as much as possible to quarantine China within the Asian region, but it looks China is not giving way to that decoy, to that conspiracy. They have tried to create artificial battle to China. They never wanted China to go as far as defining. Let me tell you, the West have tried to define the war theater where the war will happen for China. They have tried as much as possible to make China to engage them militarily within the South China Sea. There is a part in Asia, a disputed land. China is dragging the land with South Korea, with Japan, with Vietnam, with the Philippines, and all the rest of them. And the West, okay, let's see if we can create artificial war. During Obama time, there's what we call Asian pivot. Yes, that was the policy. Obama called it Asian pivot. And Obama moved a lot of American military arsenals in South Korea, in Japan, ahead of any reaction China might come on. But do you know what China did intelligently, smartly? China downplayed the seriousness of America. China manipulated the whole thing. China avoided confrontation with the United States and allies in Southeast part of China. So same happened to Trump's regime. Trump tried as much as possible to arm Vietnam, prepare Vietnam extensively to engage China if possible. Trump tried to, empower Taiwan by selling a lot of military hardwares and softwares to Taiwan government. By encouraging South Korea, Japan, Philippines, there was a lot of military drills to make sure China is quarantined, China is limited within that region. But China does not want her soil to be used as a war theater. She prefers that to be done in Africa. And she's smartly doing everything to prepare ahead of time. Because she understands that if there is outbreak of war within her region, a lot of Chinese will die. A lot of Chinese will go down. Because she is being surrounded by the friends of United States. China is in land dispute with Philippines. China is in land dispute with South Korea. China is in land dispute with Japan. China is in land dispute with Russia. China is in land dispute with India. And too many nations, including Australia. China have a land dispute with even Australia. So China understands the devastating nature of an outbreak of war or confrontation between her and the West in her region. She understands how she will suffer it. Do you know what? She wants to play the war game in Africa. She wants the war theater to be defined. I could remember there was a time I wrote something. I said, one thing I commend IPOB on, one of the things IPOB have been doing marvelously, but one of the most technical idea they have that is not common in Africa is having the ability to define the battleground for her enemy. You know, if you have the skill to define where the battle will be, definitely you're smart. And that's exactly what IPOB plays on Nigeria. You know, most time Nigeria want IPOB to carry arm to start up, and IPOB will say, no, let's first of all be dealing on diplomatic angle, and when we are done with that, then we can know who is healthy to fight and who is. So it's a smart game, and that's exactly the game China is playing. China does not want the West to define to her where the battle will be. And it's really commendable. We must appreciate wisdom whenever we see it. It doesn't matter who possesses it. Very, very important. So, and she's doing that in Africa. Let me tell you something most of us don't know. You can Google. China is busy raising a lot of military bases, secret military bases in Africa. And the West is not finding it funny. In a place known as Djibouti, China have a very big military investment in Djibouti. And she uses it most times. She uses her equipment in Djibouti to attack American equipment software. Several times, America had wanted to confront her openly in Djibouti, and thank God for the tireless efforts of the world diplomats, they calmed down the situation. So in Djibouti, China has built a resounding military installations. And you know what she does? Wherever she put military installation is to use it to spy, use it to attack electronically the equipment of those she see as her enemies. And most of us don't know, surprisingly anyway, they told you they sent doctors. China is equally heavily moving for military presence in Nigeria. And no doubt, make no mistake, the West is well aware of it. Nigeria government is in serious discussion to have Chinese military presence in her soil. So what are we trying to say? We are trying to give you a picture of what is to come. The problem Africa currently have today is not poverty, rather the mental poverty, poor mental disposition. That is the problem facing Africa today. And if that will be solved, let me tell you, no slave master prays for awakening of her slaves. In our stupidity, in our ignorance, lies the exploitation done to us by the rest. So if you expect the Western countries or the Chinese people to reawaken the docile consciousness of the African population, believe you me, in the language of the deputy leader of Mazenam, the deputy leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, Mazu Chemefo, I will say you are hallucinating. If you think any outside forces will reawaken you, will reawaken the Africa that will bring the Renaissance in Africa, you are joking. That is where we must understand that when we talk about Biafra, Biafra transcends beyond the Biafran land affair to a continental project. Yes, to a continental project. If you have been awakened, if you have been enlightened mentally, you own that responsibility to enlighten the rest of Africa. It's a responsibility. I used to tell people, I said, I discovered that we have a very deep responsibility given to us, to Elohim himself, God Almighty, to open the eyes of our people, primarily the Biafran people, and by extension, the black race all over the world. Because what we dish out, what comes out from our platforms, if we only get the consciousness, the awakening, and the rest of Africa, the rest of the black communities all over the world still lie in ignorance. Do you know the effect? The enemy will use your brothers to destroy you. It's just the way it is. That's just the way it is. If the entire Biafran race get this mental reawakening, get renaissance, and the rest of Africa lies in stupidity, in ignorance, then believe you me, when Biafra is restored, we'll have a lot of battles to fight. It is a matter of necessity. It's a matter of survival that when you are awakened, you must take it as a responsibility to awaken your neighbors. Let me give you an instance. Israel today enjoys a relative peace, unlike the Israel of 1960s, 70s. It looks Israel is enjoying a relative peace today. The secret remains. Go and Google it. Israel made sure that all her neighbors should be stabilized. First of all, should be stabilized. Because she understands that if there is crisis in Jordan, if Jordan erupts in crisis, if Jordan is destabilized, that Israel peace will be in a very big, the idea of having a stable Israel will be illusion. It can't work. So what Israel did is to make sure that Jordan is assisted as much as possible. And today you can see the benefit of that. Israel understands that until Egypt is stabilized, she won't have peace from her, Gaza boundaries. She will not have peace from Mount Sinai. She understands all these things. And she took it as a responsibility to make sure Egypt receives aid from her to be stabilized. And that is what awaits every Biafran. If we get this reawakening, Mazi Nnamdi Kanu is helping us to achieve. If we get this consciousness and we hold it to ourselves, we make it a Biafran thing only. We don't allow it to emit out of us to the rest of the black race. Believe you me, you will definitely have a lot of battle to make. So, I thank you for joining us. Thank you for being with us. And I hope in other time we keep on talking. From here, I say bye and enjoy your day.